Day 1270 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,069,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 900 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 4 tanks, 8 APVs, 49 artillery, a rocket launcher, an air defense system, and 1 surrender in disguise peace plan coming out of Friday, as President Trump rolled out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin in Alaska, somewhat literally, but the biggest applause seemed to come from Moscow. The 3-hour summit produced no ceasefire, no agreement, and no relief for Kyiv. Instead, Putin pressed sweeping demands. Ukraine must withdraw from its fortified positions in Donetsk, accept frozen battle lines in Zaporizhia and Kherson, make Russian an official language nationwide, and enshrine protections for the Russian Orthodox Church, which is tantamount to treating Ukraine like a vassal state and anything but a sovereign country, and not least by hardwiring Russian as an official language for what can only be read as a prelude to a later invasion. Just call it for what it is. And so the summit became an event that looks like Putin went with the Occupier's starter pack option 2 that I showed later last week for Russia to take all of Donetsk and Luhansk, followed by freezing the battle lines for the 2 southern partially occupied regions as well. And Putin went further, demanding for peace, formal recognition of Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and where the lines are currently drawn for Zaporizhia and Kherson, making for a condition that would codify the Kremlin's land grab, which all translates to the only real concession Putin offered was to take some more Ukrainian land now and effectively take the rest later. That's no concession at all. He also suggested that China could serve as one of Ukraine's security guarantors, a move that would tether Europe's security architecture to Beijing's influence. Imagine that. And then where Trump appeared to endorse the framework as the fastest way to peace, diverging from his administration's previous position of seeking an immediate ceasefire followed by negotiations, which is a framework that's pushed by European allies. Now, Kyiv's response was immediate. Ukraine would not abandon its sovereign territory, warning that talks on such terms were a capitulation in disguise. But more on all of this in a moment, as it was quite a big day and weekend on the map. So straight into Russia, where just 2 days after reports of a major fire at Lukoil's Volgograd refinery, the site was again reported to have been hit by explosions and further UAV sorties. Russian officials and local media quickly described the follow-up blaze as a planned discharge of oil products. It was either that or a severely detrimental unplanned discharge. As for the OG strike, that first attack on Friday was already quite significant, as this is Russia's 7th largest refinery that processes almost 15 million tons of crude annually, producing diesel, petrol, and jet fuel vital to Russia's war effort. But as of now, the site continued to smolder, coming into its 4th day, highlighting both the scale of the initial strike and the mounting pressure on Russia's energy infrastructure. Then, overnight, warehouses near the Sherbinka railway station erupted in flames, leading to rail traffic suspended. At this location, some 30 kilometers or about 20 miles, almost directly south of Moscow city. No word on the cause, but the location of the incident, barely 10 kilometers inside the capital's air defense ring, is an air defense zone that is supposed to be among the most tightly protected in the country. Now to Belgorod, where Ukrainian UAVs have pierced Russia's power grid in the borderlands once again. Overnight, drones struck a substation in Rakitnoy, cutting into the energy network just 20 kilometers from Ukraine. Now, Russia's railway network includes approximately 1,100 traction substations supporting its 54,000 kilometers of electrified lines. These are potential targets, though not all are strategically relevant. Instead, a lesser number that falls within Ukrainian reach, potentially as little as 150 of these substations, which are those that are immediately critical to Russia's war logistics. Strikes on hubs in, for instance, Rostov, Volgograd, Bryansk, and Kursk could knock the legs out from their war machine, disrupting the supply arteries feeding eastern Ukraine. And I truly look forward to mapping these ones out soon enough. Then following that event, Ukrainian FPV drones have swarmed the Rilsk highway in Russia's Kursk region, hammering a Russian convoy moving near the border, but not that close, at 30 kilometers away from Ukraine, which is a fair distance for FPV drones to travel. And with video from the scene putting on display smoke and wreckage strewn across the highway, it suggests multiple vehicles were destroyed in the strike, coming from a series of FPV drones that were potentially deployed by a mothership drone. Now to the main map, where the Ukrainian Defense Forces drove back the enemy in various regions of Dobrapilla, including at Rybizne and Zoloty Kolodiaz, Novashakova, and other settlements on this front. But the biggest hype at the moment for these updates seems to be less about this bludgeoned Russian attack, and more about whether the latest map updates look more like a dog or an alligator. But behind the memes, if I can contain myself for a moment, with the former bunny ears clipped, where a much harsher picture for Russian forces has emerged, as Ukrainian units, reinforced and reorganized, cut through the Russian spearhead that had threatened a segment of the new Donbas line. The counterattack not only halted the Russian advance, but reclaimed key villages, restoring defensive depth around Dobrapilla. Two such brigades, the 93rd Kolodny Yar Brigade, supported by the 157th Mechanized Brigade, reported dozens of enemy vehicles destroyed and hundreds of Russian troops eliminated, wounded, or taken prisoner. Where, as part of the Ukrainian counterattack, it's now known that FPV drones and strike teams were instrumental, with footage confirming hits on Russian positions, especially in the northernmost part of this sector. And as for those Russians taken prisoner, well, let's take a look at these upstanding professional military-grade gentlemen, shall we? 6 in this batch, captured by Ukraine in the bunny ears. And notice the mix of camo, with one wearing a 1990s airborne uniform top, and the rest failing to match with each other. So for now, the tide on this battlefront has shifted, Russia's advance in this sector has been broken, the Ukrainian frontline stabilized, and where Kyiv's forces are continuing to push forward against the hastily regrouped Russian units. Then as for the almost immediate area, the AFU's 7th Air Assault Corps reported on the complete clearing of the city of Pokrovsk from Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups. As a general rule, it's true that you can't win a war merely by way of passive defense, so it's noteworthy to see these types of frontal attacks being outplayed. Of course, there may be an exception to that above stated rule, because although a strictly passive defense can go a long way to hold off an attacker for a very long time, certainly there's still room for the edge cases, especially where the attacker insists on feeding the meat grinder in wasteful losses, losing its professional army, and runs out of credible equipment in a blinded bloodlust, a reality that much of the Russian army faces. Then to take a quick look around the map, another Moscovian field storage facility turned into fireworks, with a single Ukrainian FPV destroying a Russian field cache containing roughly 300 TM62 anti-tank landmines. There's nearly 10 kilo of TNT per unit, so almost 3,000 kgs, making it equal to about 20 to 25 unitary warhead HIMARS rockets. Also on the map, up north near Kupiansk, where Ukraine continued operations to repel Russian assaults near the Kupiansk's west or left bank, destroying 2 tanks, 3 MTLBs, and about 40 enemy troops in this latest clash. And those are some decent numbers for destroyed Russian armored hardware, just about anywhere on the map these days. Now back to the news, and following the latest no ceasefire deal, coming out of the high-stakes Alaska summit aimed at addressing the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, President Trump's pivot from demanding a ceasefire to dangling the idea of a comprehensive peace plan, as per laid out by Putin, has landed in Kyiv like a gut punch. Zelensky, who is now flying to Washington to meet with Trump on Monday, warned that Russia may escalate its attacks to strengthen its negotiating hand. European capitals, meanwhile, rushed to close the ranks. Leaders from Berlin, Paris, Rome dismissed the notion of handing Putin territorial concessions, insisting that Ukraine must sit at the table for any settlement. German Chancellor Merz and EU President von der Leyen repeated that Europe will be part of Ukraine's security guarantees at the stage of a ceasefire or peace deal. Across the channel, UK PM Starmer pledged deeper sanctions and confirmed Britain's defence budget is on a war-footing trajectory, aimed at 5% of GDP by the mid-2030s. And behind all of the rhetoric, Europe is quietly ramping up arms production, with the so-called Weimar Plus initiative gathering pace, which is an expanded version of the old Franco-German-Polish Weimar Triangle, now widened to include Britain and other EU states, coordinating arms production and defense policy against Russia. And then in Washington, the backlash was bipartisan. Lawmakers from both parties accused Trump of legitimizing Putin and dropping the ceasefire demand, a move critics warned that would give Moscow freedom to keep pressing its offensive while negotiations dragged on. Michael McFaul, the former US ambassador to Russia, put it bluntly to say that Putin had to do absolutely nothing to get this meeting, and in his words, Putin gained everything and gave nothing in return. Leaks added embarrassment, 8 pages of summit documents, schedules, phone numbers of US officials, and the lunch menu for His Excellency Vladimir Putin, which were found left in a hotel printer. On the menu, filet mignon, halibut, and creme brulee, alongside a bald eagle statue as a gift to Putin. And though Trump appeared to back Putin's summit framework as the fastest way to peace, Trump had reportedly also left the talks irritated, threatening to revive sanctions if future trilateral negotiations failed. But ultimately, the symbology of the red carpet being rolled out for His Excellency Vladimir Putin was some damaging optics for the US administration. Not to mention Putin's brag on F-35 fighter jets escorting him back to Russia over the Bering Sea. But above all that, Putin didn't budge on his previous demands, not at all, which looks pretty evident, instead framing Ukraine ceding land as a path to lasting peace, coming from a guy who heckled journalists at the summit as they left the room as he was sitting down with Trump. So it's a Putin framework for peace that would last about a week, leaving Ukraine wide open to compromise on its military defensive structures, giving Moscow a renewed and much better position militarily to push deeper into Ukrainian territory. Kyiv, for its part, pressed on with drone strikes and assaults on Russia's military-industrial complex, underscoring that whatever Putin promises on paper, the battlefield remains Ukraine's strongest argument. And that leads me into a quick funny to round off the video today, with the showing of an unsuccessful attempt by a Russian invader to cross an anti-tank ditch in the Donetsk region, and using all of the Russian military engineering high-tech at his disposal for what looks to be an unsteady tree branch for almost nothing but net. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks once again for all of the support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!